When 17-year-old Ryan Walker tossed his math test onto the marble counter, the bold red F at the top seemed to burn through his soul. Being the only son of billionaire investor Charles Walker came with its own weight, but failing math for the third time was a humiliation he couldn't hide. His father, a man known for building empires with numbers, barely glanced at the test before shaking his head. "Ryan, numbers don't lie. You either master them, or they master you." The word stung more than the grade itself. That afternoon, a new maid arrived at the Walker mansion. Her name was Elena, a quiet woman with kind eyes who carried herself with gentle confidence. She noticed the crumpled test paper on the counter while dusting, but instead of ignoring it, she picked it up and softly asked, "Was this yours?" Ryan rolled his eyes. "Yeah. Don't laugh. I'm hopeless at math." But Elena didn't laugh. Instead, she pulled out a chair and sat beside him. "I used to tutor kids before this job. Maybe you're not hopeless, maybe no one has shown you the right way yet." Skeptical but curious, Ryan agreed. To his surprise, Elena explained fractions and equations with simple analogies, like splitting a pizza or counting savings. For the first time, numbers made sense. Ryan didn't know it yet, but that small act of kindness, the maid choosing to help instead of judge, was about to change not only his grades, but his relationship with his father forever. The following week, Ryan found himself waiting eagerly for Elena's shift to start. Every evening, after finishing her chores, she would sit with him at the dining table, patiently breaking down complex problems into simple, real-world lessons. "Think of algebra like a puzzle," she'd say, sketching on scrap paper. "Every number has a place, it just needs to be unlocked." Ryan, who once dreaded even opening his textbook, was now solving problems he never thought he could. More importantly, he began to feel a quiet pride he hadn't known in years. But his father remained unaware. Charles Walker was consumed with meetings, stock reports, and business dinners. To him, Ryan was still the boy who couldn't measure up. One evening, Charles came home earlier than usual. As he walked past the dining hall, he paused. There was his son, usually slouched and frustrated, now leaning over a notebook with intense focus. Elena sat beside him, guiding but never giving the answers. Ryan's eyes lit up when he solved a tough equation, and he whispered, almost to himself, "I get it now." For a moment, Charles stood frozen. He hadn't seen his son look this alive in years. But instead of stepping in, he quietly walked away, his heart stirred with something he couldn't quite name, pride, mixed with guilt. That night, Ryan knocked on his father's study door. "Dad," he said nervously, holding out his math homework, "I got an A today." Charles looked at the paper, then at his son. The grade was real. His jaw tightened, but inside, something shifted. He wanted to know how this change had happened, and who was behind it. The next evening, Charles called Elena into his study. She walked in nervously, wiping her hands on her apron, unsure what mistake she might have made. "I've noticed my son's sudden improvement," Charles began, his voice calm but heavy. "Ryan doesn't change overnight. Someone is helping him." He paused, studying her carefully. "Was it you?" Elena hesitated, unsure whether admitting the truth would cost her the job. "Yes, sir," she said softly. "But only because he wanted to learn. All I did was show him a different way." Charles leaned back in his chair, his sharp gaze unrelenting. "You were hired as a maid, not a tutor. Why involve yourself in matters that aren't yours?" Her heart pounded, but she met his eyes. "Because, sir, sometimes all a child needs is someone who believes in them. He already had the ability. He just needed patience." For the first time in years, Charles was left speechless. Her words cut through his pride. He had built an empire, but he had failed to give his son the one thing he truly needed, understanding. Later that night, Charles quietly watched from the doorway as Ryan and Elena worked through a geometry problem. Ryan laughed when he solved it, his joy filling the room. Charles realized this wasn't about grades anymore, it was about his son finally believing in himself. Still, pride made it hard for him to admit gratitude. Instead, he said gruffly, "Ryan, remember, nothing comes easy. Keep working." But his eyes lingered on Elena, and for the first time, there was no dismissal, only respect. He knew then, this woman, a simple maid, had given his son a gift money could never buy. Weeks passed, and Ryan's confidence only grew. For the first time in his life, he raised his hand in math class. His teacher, surprised, watched as the boy who once avoided eye contact solved problems with steady clarity. One afternoon, an announcement shook the school: the annual inter-school math competition was coming up. Normally, Ryan would have ignored it, but this time, his teacher encouraged him to participate. "You've got a sharp mind, Ryan. Don't waste it." Ryan hesitated, then told Elena. "What if I fail in front of everyone?" Elena smiled warmly. "Failure isn't falling down, Ryan. It's refusing to try. You've already proven you can rise. Now show yourself just how far you can go." Her words echoed in his heart. With Elena's guidance, he practiced each night. She created flashcards, timed drills, and even invented games to make problem-solving fun. Slowly, Ryan began to believe, really believe, that he could do it. On the day of the competition, Charles surprised Ryan by showing up. He sat in the audience, his expression unreadable. Ryan's palms were sweaty, but when he glanced at Elena sitting quietly in the back row, her reassuring nod steadied him. The questions were tough. Some students gave up halfway, but Ryan pushed through. At one point, he nearly panicked, until he remembered Elena's voice: "Every problem has a solution, you just have to look from the right angle." With renewed focus, he finished strong. When the results were announced, Ryan's name was called for second place. The crowd applauded, but for Ryan, it felt like winning gold. He turned to see his father clapping, slowly, proudly, and Elena smiling with tears in her eyes. That evening, the Walker mansion was filled with an unusual warmth. The silver trophy Ryan had brought home gleamed on the dining table, but what truly shined was the boy's smile. Charles sat across from his son, still absorbing what he had witnessed. For years, he had measured success by numbers, deals, and profits. But nothing compared to the sight of his son standing tall with pride in his own achievement. After dinner, Charles called Elena into the room. Ryan looked nervous, worried his father might scold her again. But instead, Charles stood and spoke with a sincerity his son had rarely heard. "Elena," he began, his voice softer than usual, "I owe you more than I can put into words. You did what I could not, you gave my son back his confidence." Elena lowered her head humbly. "Sir, I only guided him. The strength was always his." Charles shook his head. "Strength means little if no one sees it. You saw it. You believed in him when even I failed to." He paused, his eyes moist, then added, "And for that, I thank you." Ryan's heart swelled. He had never seen his father so vulnerable. He glanced at Elena, who smiled gently, and for the first time, he felt like his family was whole. From that day forward, Charles no longer measured his son by grades alone. He spent more evenings with Ryan, often joining their study sessions, not as a teacher, but as a father learning patience. Elena remained in the house, not just as a maid, but as someone the family deeply respected. And Ryan? He never forgot the lesson Elena had taught him: sometimes, the greatest wealth isn't money, it's the kindness that helps someone discover their true worth.